On here with another video. I'd like to talk to you about good fat and bad fat, but just not only good fat, bad fat, but good stuff that you want in you, bad stuff you don't. Most people generally think that fat is bad, but it's only certain types of fat that are bad, and there's actually good fat. So in this video, I'm going to be educating you on bad fat and good fat, because doctors don't talk to you about this. Doctors talk to you about the wrong kind of fat, cholesterol. I want to talk to you about fat in a way that gets you educated to make you awesome, improve the quality of your life, okay? So I'm calling it good fat and bad fat in this particular video. And I'm going to also tell you about two types of fat that you want that are actually good. So I'll be getting to that, the two good fats. You want to stick through this whole video, understand what the two good types of fat are. And also I'm going to give you pictures of them, show photographs of the bad fat, the good fat. And then I'm going to talk to you about the type of fat that you need to have that's essential, that you're going to die within seconds if you don't have this kind of fat. And then the best way to track it. Okay, so right away from the beginning, I want to show this cool picture. Okay, I just created this. Well, I didn't really create it, but I was the inspiration for it, sort of. I asked AI to create a picture of somebody that has a lot of visceral fat and inflammation in their body. So this is the image they got that they came up with. So it's pretty interesting because, you know what? It kind of looks like people that do have a lot of visceral fat. In fact, the more visceral fat you have, the more you're going to resemble this. So let's take a look at my slides here. The next one is a face generated by AI specifically. These are humans that really don't exist, but these are what humans would look like according to AI with elevated amounts of visceral fat, which guess you should be able to guess is this one here, and in a human what they should look like with low levels of visceral fat. So again, we always see this kind of effect that visceral fat has, this inflammatory effect on your face. So right away we'll be getting into the bad fat, which will be visceral fat. So what does visceral fat look like and where is it? Okay, so visceral fat is in your abdomen. Viscera is for the term organ, so it's around your organ. So it's all this white stuff inside of you. And you don't know how much you have. Do you know how many followers I have on the internet that claim they know how much visceral fat they have? Well, you don't really know unless you get something accurate like an MRI or a CT. A DEXA is fairly accurate, but not as accurate as an MRI. And a DEXA scan doesn't give you the appearance. It's all the difference in the world to look at this fat than have a number. Okay, so you really want to stare at this fat and see it if you're going to change your life. If you just want to quantify it, okay, but who wants to quantify it? You want to get rid of it. And when you see it, you're going to laser lock on why you want to get rid of it. You're going to get motivated. And a DEXA scan doesn't do it. Nobody gets a DEXA scan and says, I got a DEXA scan and guess what? It changed my life. But you come see Dr. Sean, you get an MRI, you see visceral fat, and that's exactly what's going to happen. You're going to get a new life because you're going to see what's inside of you, and it's going to make a lot more sense. So this individual had a wake-up call. They had more visceral fat inside of them than they had anything else. And that is pretty much the case for most of my clients when they come and they travel to me, and they're coming from all over the world now to work on their visceral fat. Why? Because nothing is more important to optimizing your health and getting rid of visceral fat. Nothing. In 30 years of medicine, nothing improves people more than getting rid of visceral fat. And yet, what do you talk about? What do you hear about when you go to your doctor? Cholesterol. The wrong kind of discussion about fat. Well, what's a good amount of visceral fat? What does that look like? Well, an abdomen like this, instead of this abdomen here that looks like a barrel, you know, a dad bod, a big, huge stomach. You look at this guy here, a friend of mine, Gabe. Gabe has a nice oval shape, okay? Gabe has big muscles, the dark stuff. Gabe does not have a lot of the white stuff. So you want a lot of dark on an MRI, which is muscle and organ. Look how big Gabe's core is. Back muscles are nice. And you want less of the white stuff in the middle. That's visceral fat. So Gabe's an example of a good abdomen. You want to have that oval shape. This is his belly button. These are his back muscles. So it gives you an idea. What would your abdomen look like? If you got a dad bod, guarantee if your stomach is sticking out, then you're going to have a lot of visceral fat inside of you. All right, well, let's look at another bad fat. So we started off with visceral fat. Let's look at bad fat number 2. Okay, so this is visceral fat, and now we're going to go to the skeletal muscle. We're going to look at the effects of visceral fat, the systemic inflammatory effects of visceral fat, what causes it, also causes muscle fat infiltration. The medical term for this is myosteatosis. Steatosis for fat, myo for muscle. So this is fat in the muscles. So here are legs of this individual with elevated visceral fat, and they have elevated amounts of fat in their muscle, these white streaks. Okay, let's see if I can blow it up a little bit more. And so those white streaks here are fat being deposited in the skeletal muscle. And that's going to cause the muscle to shrink over a period of time. We call that sarcopenia. And it's also going to degrade performance. So we can see this on CTs. We can see this on MRIs. And guaranteed, if you've had CTs and MRIs of your muscles, it's probably been in there. And guess what? Ignored by medical science, okay? Ignored by your doctors because we're not taught in medical school. And I'm going to pin the rose on Big Pharma and the influence in conventional healthcare because they don't want you to know about this. AI just came out a couple months ago saying that the presence of myosteatosis, these fat streaks in your legs, double your risk for a heart attack, for cardiovascular disease, for mortality from that. So you do not want to have this. It increases sarcopenia, and it explains why when you're an old person, you have really weak legs because you get all this fatty infiltrates, and nobody will have warned you along the way, despite the fact that you probably had plenty of warnings along the way. Opportunities have been warned, through CT scans and MRIs, through your legs and shoulders and different areas. Even in your abdomen, you can see myosteatosis and the abdominal muscles, and they're just ignored by the conventional healthcare community. And oh, by the way, those same radiologists and doctors that are reading this, they're falling apart too. So, they're ignorant. It's not like intentional, like we're not going to tell this patient about this. No, they just don't know about it to read it. Okay, they don't know that it's bad. They don't know to read it. Doctors look at it. It's out of ignorance. Okay. Well, let's take a look at a good example of somebody who does not have it. What do you want to look like? Filet mignon. Okay. You want to look like tenderloin. You want to look like pure muscle and no fatty streaks. Okay. The other term for myosteatosis, in a kind of a graphical example that I like to describe it, is human marbling. Okay, so that's like marbleized steak, and you know what marbleized steak looks like because you probably bought steak either in a restaurant or in a grocery store. You do not want to buy steak like this, and you do not want to be steak like this. You do not want to have human marbling in your tissues. This comes from a stressful life, confining animals, not letting them walk, not letting them go on pastures, feeding a lot of grains and carbohydrates and molasses, corn and sugar, and basically a diet that's pretty similar to the standard American diet, what you're eating. Okay, so you want to eat a species-specific diet. Stay tuned throughout this video, and I'll get into exactly what you should do. My strategies to help reduce not only fatty infiltrates in your muscles or myosteatosis, but visceral fat, and really optimizing your whole body and your whole life. All right, well, let's look at another bad player, okay? Another bad player is this stuff right here, okay? Now, this collectively is called subcutaneous fat. Sub meaning below the cutaneous, which is the skin. So just below the skin, all this white stuff collectively is subcutaneous fat. But did you know there's 2 compartments to subcutaneous fat? That's right. This stuff has 2 compartments, and it's so important. They're so different that nature even draws a black line on it so that you can be educated about these 2 compartments. One is good, bueno. The other one is bad, mal, okay, bad. All right, people complain about my Spanish. I'm trying at least, okay? Sorry if I don't pronounce it really well. I'm trying. You go to Russia and see how good you are at your pronunciation, okay? So anyway, there's bad and there's good, okay? And it's like bricks and clouds. It's that different. You can't lump it together. And who lumps it together? Most people. And again, it's ignored by a doctor. All right, so where's that line, that separation? See this black line right there? It goes around up in here. That's it. Okay, scarpa fascia. It's not important what it's called, but it is a membrane that separates, fibrinous membrane that separates these two compartments. And what's different about them? Well, this one out here is the superficial subcutaneous compartment, and it is good. Okay, so it's one of the good fats you want to have. So one of the two I told you about, you just learned the first one, the superficial subcutaneous fat. What's good about it? Well, in studies, we generally see the more subcutaneous fat there is, this protective benefit that people have. So if you don't have any subcutaneous fat, you don't see this protective benefit. But it's a little murky, a little bit. And the reason is because generally in studies, they lump in the bad stuff with the good stuff, okay? So how helpful it is to figure out subcutaneous fat if you call it the same, two different compartments, the same thing, especially when one is good and one is bad. So why is the good one good? I told you it's protective, but why? All right, so the reason is, for one, we do know it releases a molecule called adiponectin. Adiponectin, A-D-I-P-O-N-E-C-T-I-N. Adiponectin is a molecule that's associated with decreasing your risk for cardiovascular disease. It also increases your HDL, your good cholesterol. So adiponectin is something that's protective, it's beneficial, and you want to have elevated levels. You want to have adiponectin. And when you have lower amounts, you have higher incidence disease, particularly cardiovascular disease. So adiponectin is good. It comes from this particular compartment, superficial subcutaneous fat. Now this bad one here, deep subcutaneous fat, I'll do another video about it dedicated. Deep subcutaneous fat does not secrete adiponectin, and it secretes bad players like visceral fat. It's similar to visceral fat. Tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin 6, resistant, a hormone, a molecule associated with causing leptin resistance. So it actually is a bad player like visceral fat. And guess what? It corresponds to visceral fat. That's right. The more visceral fat you have, the more deep subcutaneous fat you have. So when we see a lot of visceral fat, like we do in this individual, we'll see a lot more deep subcutaneous fat. So it's a bad player. You don't want it. You don't want to have visceral fat. You want to have a good type of fat called superficial subcutaneous fat. So we'll get into that a little bit more, but let's look at another individual that has a huge amount of visceral fat, and their deep subcutaneous fat is very deep, and they have just a little bit of superficial subcutaneous fat, just a little bit there, but they are, about 75-80% is deep subcutaneous fat. So you really want to have very little deep subcutaneous fat, and men generally have more deep subcutaneous fat than women. Women tend to have more, kind of almost like half and half. I'd say about, half and half, maybe 40, 60, 45, 55%, but basically they're predominantly going to be more superficial subcutaneous fat and less of the deep. The men are just the opposite. Almost all, majority is going to be deep subcutaneous fat. And then let's take a look at that same individual through a slice, okay? Before we were kind of slicing through their abdomen this way. Now we're going to take a slice through their abdomen this way, okay? So we're looking at, this is the front of their abdomen, this is their back muscles. And so now we see all the visceral fat, this is their kidney, visceral fat just surrounding all of their organs, highly inflammatory visceral fat. And this is their poor heart up here, and they're even surrounded by fat, pericardial fat around the heart. So this is an interesting view that highlights just how much this inflammatory stuff is inside of you, just all over your awesome organs, and you don't even know it. It's completely ignored. You can have a CT of your abdomen, an MRI of your abdomen. It's completely ignored by medical science. Crazy. Thank God you found out about Dr. Sean to warn you about this. All right, well, let's take a look at another source of this dangerous fat. Now, this visceral fat, also the process that causes visceral fat, remember those faces, how it causes your face to change? Well, we can find these facial deposits, these fat depots in your face. So this is one of my clients who's got fat right here in their temporal pad, okay, around their temporal lobes, their temples of right here where you have your temples, you can feel your temple artery. You get these fat depositions in there, and that's what causes this big inflamed face. So the more visceral fat you have, the more this sticks out. And so it literally influences your face. So let's take a look at how these facial faces change. Here's a client that recently lost a huge amount of their visceral fat. They had a large inflamed face. They got rid of their visceral fat. And then look how much leaner, as they got rid of these fat deposits in their face, their muscles hung, tissues hung in their face in a much more healthy manner. All right, let's look at another client, and I also have some scans handy of his. So this was him when he first came to me. Then he lost 35 pounds, and all this visceral fat initially when he came in, he reduced his visceral fat, considerably, and we can see that distance here in the sagittal abdominal diameter. He went from having a big belly, big barrel belly, to having more of an oval shape. And it looked like he reversed in age. Look how much healthier he got. And that's what happens when you lose visceral fat. So it's the type of weight you lose. Some people, believe it or not, lose weight. They can lose muscle, but they don't lose visceral fat. Then they look aged. And that's really what happens in cancer or inflammatory process. You hold on to your visceral fat and you lose other healthy tissues. You lose superficial subcutaneous fat instead of visceral fat. You're going to look more inflamed. You're going to look older, and you're going to look worse. Here's another individual who lost weight, but they mostly lost cortisol because they changed jobs. Okay, so visceral fat, one of the causes of visceral fat is stress, because stress causes increase in cortisol. Cortisol, in turn, causes increase in visceral fat. So it's one of the things that Dr. Sean checks with clients is the amount of stress they have. And we develop plans and strategies to get rid of visceral fat. We address stress, looking specifically at cortisol that causes this increase in visceral fat. So look at the huge change in the face. This guy stressed out, and about this time, he had 2 heart attacks, cardiac arrest, bad. Yeah. Thumping on chest, CPR, not good, really bad. And then look at him, in just 3 months, he changed his face this much from changing his jobs, reducing that stress. Do not stay in a stressful job. If you don't like your job, get out, get another job. Our ancestors, our job was always the same thing. We'd go out and hunt. And if we were hunting and we didn't like it there because there were too many lions and tigers and bears, and it was just too stressful, it was too difficult, we would get up and get out of Dodge. We would change encampments and we would mitigate it. Okay, you can't necessarily change your job because we were all hunters back then. But today you can change your job, change your circumstance so you can reduce that amount of cortisol and your visceral fat. So here's my own change of my face, how much I had visceral fat in my life. I actually weigh less here, and I weigh more today. So I reduced my visceral fat, and because I changed my diet, and I also I'm a lot happier in my job that I do today as a health optimizing, health and performance optimizing physician. I'm super happy. Dr. Sean is so happy. I'm so happy. I love my job. So come see me if you're interested in biologically optimizing. You can see how excited I am to take care of you. So let's look at some legs without myosteatosis. These are legs that have them, and the legs without it. Okay, so these bad fats really destroy your health and your appearance and your performance, how you look and how you perform. All right, so I'd tell you about an essential fat that you need to have, that you would be dead in seconds if you didn't. This type of fat, it's cholesterol. Okay, but the conversation is dominated like it's this bad, really bad thing to have, and it's not a bad thing. It's a really good thing. So you really want to have healthy levels of cholesterol, and how you live is how you deal with that cholesterol. And you're going to oxidize it, or you're going to use it in a good way, or you're going to use it in a bad way. So summarize this up. The best way to evaluate fat is get an MRI. So you want to look for the good fats, which is fat in your superficial subcutaneous compartment. And a good example of that superficial subcutaneous fat compartment is low visceral fat and low deep subcutaneous fat. So this individual, I'm very happy to report, is actually my wife. So she's got a very healthy amount of subcutaneous fat and a very small amount of deep subcutaneous fat. So I'm super proud of my wife. She looks great. She looks fantastic. One day she'll let me put her image maybe up, what she actually looks like. But at least I can share her MRI scans, and boy, does she got a good MRI scan. Very low visceral fat and good healthy amount of subcutaneous fat and the lowest amount of deep subcutaneous fat. In fact, the best example I could show. Now, another great example is our daughter. Okay, so our daughter has another, probably the two best I got are my wife and my daughter. How cool is that, right? In my family. So they've been at it for a while, they live with me. So visceral fat, a very, very, very small amount of visceral fat, and very small amount of deep subcutaneous fat, and a nice healthy amount of superficial subcutaneous fat. So you want very little deep subcutaneous fat, and you want a healthy amount of superficial subcutaneous fat. So what is the other good fat besides superficial subcutaneous fat? Well, the other good fat you want to have is called brown adipose tissue, or brown fat. So, or it's also abbreviated as BAT. Brown adipose tissue, or brown fat, is the type of fat that's associated with thermogenesis. So it helps to keep you warm. And brown fat is accumulated when you do things like expose yourself to really cold temperatures. So through cold shock proteins and kind of hormetic experiences, you can build up brown adipose tissue, or you can be a baby. Babies are born with a lot of brown adipose tissue. And the reason it's called brown adipose tissue is because it has higher levels of mitochondria, your powerhouses. So underneath electron microscopes, we can see these increased elevated amounts of mitochondria, which produce energy and ATP. And in this case, through, basically a chemical process, heat is created to keep those babies warm. Even when they're stripped down and naked, born naked, they can keep themselves warm way better than adults because they have these elevated amounts of brown adipose tissue. So MRI can detect brown adipose tissue. So here's the different amounts. There's a small amount in this individual, a very large amount in this individual, and a pretty large amount in this individual. So we can actually quantify and see it. It's another reason why MRI is so good. You can't get that on DEXA scan, and you can't read the deep subcutaneous fat. All right, so what do you do? I told you I would share with you in this video what you got to do to optimize your good amount of good fats, okay, getting good fats, and eliminate the bad fats while optimizing your health and optimizing your microbiome. So this is my list. So screenshot it, do these strategies, and they're going to help a lot with doing these things. Now, if you really want to get rid of the bad players, get rid of bad fat, you want to optimize good tissue, optimize the good fat, then you could consider working with me. I'm looking for very motivated people who are willing